The Celestial Accord University of Higher Cognition floated serenely in the manufactured gravity well of Station Luminos 9, a monument to what happened when 17 different species collectively decided that education was more important than territorial disputes. It was, by all measurable standards, the most advanced institution of learning in the known galaxy. They had professors who could calculate quantum probabilities in their sleep. They had libraries that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. They had a cafeteria that served cuisine from 200 worlds, though most of it tasted like the color beige had achieved sentience and decided to disappoint everyone. What they did not have, however, was anyone who understood what a catastrophically stupid idea it was to antagonize a human. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us rewind to the beginning, to a time when ignorance was bliss and medical insurance premiums were reasonable. The university prided itself on being a beacon of enlightenment in a galaxy still occasionally plagued by the inconvenient urge to blow each other up. It accepted students from all member worlds of the Accord, provided they could pass the entrance examinations and promised not to start any wars in the dormitories. For 300 cycles, this system had worked beautifully. Students learned, grew, and occasionally discovered new forms of mathematics that made everyone's heads hurt in interesting ways. Then humanity applied for membership. Earth, as it turned out, was what the galactic community politely termed a high-gravity developmental world, and what everyone else called a Deathworld nightmare factory, where evolution apparently held a grudge. The planet rotated too fast, had weather that could kill you in 7 different ways simultaneously, harbored predators that hunted for sport, and possessed an atmosphere that was technically breathable, but only if you enjoyed the taste of industrial solvent mixed with ocean spray and regret. Naturally, the Accord accepted Earth's application. After all, they were enlightened. They were civilized. They did not discriminate based on something as trivial as a species evolving in what amounted to nature's personal vendetta against the concept of survival. They did, however, make a note in the file, a very detailed note, with several footnotes and the appendix. The human exchange student arrived on a Tuesday, which was the 3rd day of the week on Station Luminos 9, though it bore no resemblance to any Tuesday that Earth had ever produced. Her name does not particularly matter for this story, so let us simply call her the protagonist and move on with our lives. What does matter is that she stood approximately 165 centimeters tall, possessed the kind of build that came from a childhood spent fighting gravity that wanted to crush her, and had eyes that suggested she had seen things that would make a horror novelist reconsider their career choices. She kept to herself mostly, studied quietly, did not participate in the social hierarchies that dominated university life. This was interpreted by her classmates not as prudent caution from someone navigating an alien culture, but as evidence of primitive, antisocial tendencies. The Xenobiology 301 course met every second day in Lecture Hall 17, a space designed to accommodate 60 students of various sizes, shapes, and atmospheric requirements. The professor, a Thexian named Vornalth, who possessed 6 eyes, and the kind of academic arrogance that comes from having tenure for 40 years. Taught with the enthusiasm of someone reading the classified advertisements from a newspaper, printed in a language they did not speak. The students, however, were considerably more animated. Crixtal was a Valesian, which meant he looked vaguely like someone had taken a praying mantis, given it delusions of grandeur, and then sent it to business school. He sat in the 3rd row with his 3 closest friends, a collection of species that had bonded over their shared belief that they were, in fact, better than everyone else. There was Hovnar the Greltian, whose species had evolved on a low-gravity world where the most dangerous predator was a herbivore that sometimes forgot to chew its food properly. There was Pelquin, a Sauriath who looked like an octopus, had achieved consciousness, and immediately decided to become insufferable. And finally, there was Zix, whose species name was unpronounceable, but who resembled a floating crystal that occasionally hummed with what might have been thoughts or might have been digestive processes. These four had noticed the human immediately. How could they not? She sat in the back row, took notes on an actual physical tablet like some kind of primitive, and never spoke unless directly addressed. She was, in their estimation, the perfect target. "I am telling you," Krixtal chittered during a break between lectures, his mandibles clicking with excitement. "She is hiding something. All of them are. Do you know what I read about Earth? That it is a developmental world with barely functional technology?" Pelquin gurgled, their translator rendering the bubbling sounds into something resembling contempt. "More than that, the entire planet is a death trap. The gravity alone would crush most civilized species. They have storms that can level cities. Their oceans contain creatures that could swallow a shuttle. And the humans?" Krixtal leaned in conspiratorially. "They evolved by learning to throw rocks at predators until the predators got the message." "Surely you are exaggerating," Hovnar said, though his voice carried uncertainty. His species had evolved past physical violence approximately 10,000 years ago. The concept of throwing rocks at anything seemed barbaric. "I am not. And here is what I propose." Krixtal's eyes glittered with what he believed was cleverness, but what was actually the kind of stupidity that gets inscribed on cautionary plaques. "We expose her, publicly. Show everyone what these humans really are beneath that quiet exterior. We stream it, make it educational. Professor Vornalth is always saying we should be more engaged with practical applications of xenobiology." "Stream it?" Zix hummed, their crystalline structure vibrating with interest. "Of course. The university encourages documentation of educational moments. We would be performing a service, really. Showing our fellow students the reality of Deathworld species before they make the mistake of trusting them. It should be noted here that the Celestial Accord University possessed a very advanced network of recording devices. Cameras existed in every classroom, capable of capturing lectures from multiple angles simultaneously. Students could live stream their educational experiences to their home worlds, sharing knowledge across the stars. It was a beautiful system that had fostered understanding and learning for generations. It was also about to become a liability. The plan, such as it was, took shape over the next 3 days. Krixtal and his associates spent their free time researching Earth, compiling a list of every terrifying fact they could find about the planet and its dominant species. They discovered information about persistence hunting, about endurance that allowed humans to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They learned about the human immune system, which apparently treated diseases the way a bouncer treats unruly patrons. They read about pain tolerance, about healing factors, about the disturbing fact that humans had conquered their world not through natural advantages, but through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They interpreted all of this as weakness, as proof that humans were nothing more than fragile creatures who had gotten lucky on a hostile world. This was their first mistake. It would not be their last. The xenobiology lecture on the appointed day concerned the evolutionary adaptations of various species to their home environments. Professor Vornalth droned through slides showing Polarian wing structures and Greltian photosynthetic skin cells with the passion of someone describing beige paint drying on a beige wall. The human sat in her usual spot taking notes, occasionally glancing up at the displays with mild interest. Krixtal had positioned himself perfectly. His personal recording device, small enough to be overlooked, sat on his desk at an angle that would capture everything. He had already started streaming to his feed, where approximately 200 students from various worlds watched with curiosity. The classroom cameras were, of course, also recording as they always did, feeding into the university's educational archive. "Professor," Crixtall said, raising one of his forelimbs, "I have a question about Deathworld adaptations." Vornalth sighed, which involved 3 of his 6 eyes rotating independently in what might have been annoyance. "Yes? Specifically, I am curious about humans. We have one in our class, after all. Perhaps she could provide some practical demonstration of Earth adaptations?" The protagonist looked up from her notes. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted infinitesimally. Anyone who had spent time around actual predators might have recognized it as the subtle tensing that preceded decisive action. The students of Celestial Accord University had not spent time around actual predators. "I am sure our human colleague would prefer to simply observe," Vornalth said dismissively. He had enough problems without adding interspecies incidents to his workload. "Oh, I insist," Crixtall pressed. "It would be educational. We could learn about the physical capabilities of Deathworld species. Strength, reflexes, that sort of thing." He turned to address the protagonist directly. "You would not mind, would you? Unless, of course, the rumors about human fragility are true?" The protagonist closed her tablet slowly. When she spoke, her voice was level and carried the kind of calm that generally preceded hurricanes. "What exactly did you have in mind? A simple demonstration? Strength comparison, perhaps, or reaction time? We could make it fun, like a game." Crixtall's mandibles clicked with what he thought was friendly enthusiasm. "After all, you are the first human most of us have met. We are simply curious about your capabilities." "Curious," the protagonist repeated flatly. "Exactly. Scientific curiosity. The foundation of learning." Crixtall gestured to his friends. "We could form 2 teams. A friendly competition. Nothing dangerous." This was, of course, a lie. Crixtall had every intention of making the human look foolish, of exposing what he believed would be inferior strength and speed compared to civilized species. His friends were in on it. Even a few other students had been quietly informed that something entertaining was about to happen. The protagonist stood up. The movement was economical, no wasted energy, the kind of efficiency that came from a lifetime of living under gravity that wanted to murder you. "If you insist on a demonstration, I will participate. But I want it clearly stated that I tried to decline." Of course," Crixtall said, practically vibrating with excitement. Everyone heard her. "She is participating voluntarily." Professor Vornalth should have stopped it there. A more alert instructor might have noticed the warning signs, might have recognized the setup for what it was. But Vornalth was thinking about his research paper and how many more cycles until retirement. So he simply waved a forelimb in vague permission and returned to his slides. The students cleared space in the front of the classroom, forming a loose circle. Crixtall positioned himself opposite the protagonist, his friends flanking him in what they probably thought was an impressive formation. The live stream viewership had jumped to over 500. The classroom cameras captured everything from multiple angles, dutifully recording what everyone believed would be an amusing interspecies comparison. "Simple test first," Crixtall announced. "Strength. I will push from this side. You push from your side. We see who is stronger. Fair?" The protagonist nodded once. They clasped forelimbs, or in the human's case, hands. Crixtall's chitinous appendage against her flesh and bone. The Valesian braced himself, his body language broadcasting confidence to his audience. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He pushed. The protagonist did not move. Krixtal pushed harder, putting his full strength into it, the kind of force that would have easily overwhelmed most civilized species. The protagonist yawned. Krixtal's confidence flickered. He adjusted his stance, tried a different angle, pushed with everything he had. The human's arm did not budge. She looked bored. "Are you finished?" she asked. "I was not using my full strength." Krixtal lied. "Now I will." He pushed again. The protagonist waited approximately 3 seconds, then pushed back. Krixtal skidded backward 4 meters, his feet scrambling for purchase on the smooth floor. He crashed into a desk, sending data pads scattering. The watching students murmured. This was not going according to plan. "Interesting," the protagonist said. "Would anyone else like a turn?" Havenar stepped forward. The Glitchedand was larger than Krixtal, with a body structure designed for his low-gravity homeworld's environmental challenges. "I will try, but let us make it more interesting. A test of reflexes instead." "Fine," the protagonist said. "I will attempt to touch your shoulder. You attempt to stop me. First contact wins. Agreed?" "Agreed." Havenar moved. He was fast by Glitchedand standards, his arm lashing out in what should have been a lightning-quick strike. The protagonist was not there. She had shifted position so minutely that Havenar's hand passed through empty air. Before he could reset, she tapped his shoulder with one finger. "Point," she said. "Again," Havenar demanded. "I was not ready." They reset. Havenar tried again, and again, and again. Each time, the protagonist evaded with minimal movement, then tapped his shoulder as if she had all the time in the world. By the 7th attempt, Havenar was breathing hard, his photosynthetic skin cells working overtime. The protagonist was not even sweating. "Perhaps," Pelquin gurgled from the sidelines, their translator working to convey their growing unease. "We should stop." "No," Krixtal snapped. His pride was wounded, his broadcast was being flooded with messages mocking him, and his carefully planned humiliation of the human had inverted into his own embarrassment. "One more test, a real test." He retrieved something from his bag. It looked like a training implement, a padded rod used in combat sports on several worlds. "Defense test. We attack slowly, you defend. Show us these famous human reflexes everyone speaks of." "I would rather not," the protagonist said quietly. "What? Afraid?" Krixtal's voice took on an edge. "You have embarrassed me in front of hundreds of viewers. Surely you can handle a simple defense demonstration?" "I am giving you an opportunity to stop," the protagonist said. Her voice had gone very flat. "Take it." "Attack pattern Delta," Krixtal said to his friends, ignoring her completely. This was the moment, the specific second when everything went irreversibly wrong. Because Krixtal and his friends had planned this particular pattern, had researched what they believed were human weak points. The plan was to strike simultaneously from multiple angles, just hard enough to make contact, to prove that humans could be overwhelmed by coordinated civilized species. What they had failed to understand was that humans did not have weak points in the way they imagined. Humans had evolved past the concept of weak points. Every part of a human could become a weapon. Every moment of vulnerability was temporary. They attacked. 4 of them, moving in coordination, training rods swinging toward the protagonist from different vectors. The classroom cameras caught what happened next. Or rather, they caught the beginning and the end. But the middle became mysteriously corrupted in the recording. Static, digital artifacts. The kind of technical glitches that absolutely should not happen with university-grade equipment, but somehow did. The live stream that Krixtal had started also glitched. Multiple viewer reports would later claim that their feeds froze at the critical moment, buffered endlessly, or simply crashed. Very convenient, those glitches. What the glitches obscured was this. The protagonist moved. Not fast by human standards. She was holding back even then. But fast enough that civilized species, evolved on safe worlds with gentle gravity and domesticated predators, could not process what they were seeing. She caught Krixtal's training rod mid-swing, simply plucked it out of the air as if he had been offering it to her politely, used his own momentum to yank him forward and off balance. Her other hand deflected Havanar's strike, redirecting it into Pelquin's tentacle. Zix, the floating crystal, found themselves knocked aside by what appeared to be an accidental collision, but was anything but. Krixtal tried to pull away. The protagonist did not let him. She had his rod, which meant she had leverage, which meant she controlled his positioning. She pulled him closer, used him as a shield when his friends tried to reset for another attack. "Stop," she said again. They did not stop. Halvanar, panicking now, swung his rod with actual force behind it, no longer playful, actually trying to hit her. The protagonist sighed. She released Krixtal, who stumbled backward, caught Havanar's rod one-handed, twisted it. The Greltian's grip was not strong enough to hold on. The rod became hers. She used it to sweep Pelquin's tentacles out from under them. The Sauriath collapsed into a heap of confused limbs. Zix tried to flee. The protagonist threw the rod. It struck the crystalline entity with perfect precision, sending them spinning into a wall with a sound like wind chimes, having an existential crisis. Krixtal rushed her from behind, tried to grab her in a restraining hold, the kind that worked in Valesian martial sports. This was his final mistake. The protagonist moved into the hold instead of away from it, got inside Krixtal's reach, drove her elbow backward into what might have been his thorax. There was a cracking sound that made everyone in the classroom wince. Krixtal made a noise like air escaping from a punctured shuttle hull. She was not finished, grabbed his forelimb, twisted. The chitin broke with a wet snap. Krixtal's scream was shrill enough to trigger auditory safety protocols on several students' translators. Havanar tried to pull her off his friend. The protagonist kicked backward without looking. Her foot found his center mass. The Greltian flew 6 meters, crashed into the wall, and slumped to the floor wheezing. Pelquin had untangled themselves, was reaching for an emergency communicator. The protagonist was there somehow, despite being 3 meters away a second earlier. She grabbed 2 of their tentacles, tied them into a knot that would have been impressive if it was not so terrifying, and left the Sauriath howling on the floor. Zix tried humming at a frequency meant to cause disorientation. The protagonist picked up a datapad and threw it. The impact sent cracks spreading through Zix's crystalline structure like a spider web of very poor life decisions. The entire sequence of events took approximately 8 seconds. When the cameras resumed working properly, they showed 4 injured students, 1 calm human, and Professor Vornalth standing at his podium with all 6 eyes wide in the universal expression of someone reconsidering their career choices. "Anyone else?" the protagonist asked the classroom at large. There was not anyone else. There was, in fact, a great deal of silence. The kind of silence that happens when every survival instinct in the room simultaneously suggests that moving or speaking would be catastrophically stupid. "No?" The protagonist dusted off her hands. "Then I will return to my seat." She did exactly that. sat down, picked up her stylus, resumed taking notes as if nothing had happened. The live stream had caught none of the actual violence. The university cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. What everyone saw was 4 students attacking a human, then the feeds glitching, then 4 students on the ground groaning while the human calmly returned to her desk. Campus security arrived 4 minutes later. They had been alerted by the emergency beacon that Pell Quinn had managed to activate. They entered the classroom expecting to find a human who needed to be restrained and transported to holding. What they found instead was 4 injured students requiring medical attention and 1 human sitting quietly in the back row. What happened? The security chief, a Thexian like Professor Vornalth, demanded. Every student in the classroom turned to look at Krixtal, who was cradling his broken forelimb and making small whimpering sounds. The Valesian, to his very small credit, recognized that lying would only make things worse. I attacked her, he managed. She defended herself. Defended? The security chief looked at the wreckage. This looks like more than defense. I insisted on the demonstration, Krixtal said. She warned me to stop. Multiple times, I did not stop. The security chief turned to the protagonist. Is this accurate? Yes, she said simply. The recording devices malfunctioned. Convenient. The protagonist shrugged. I am from Earth. Strange things happen around us sometimes. Electromagnetic anomalies. It is in the literature. This was a lie. But it was a lie that could not be easily disproven, and given the alternative was accepting that a human had dismantled 4 students in less time than it took to register what was happening. The security chief was willing to grasp at any explanation that did not make his job more complicated. All of you, he gestured to the injured students, to medical. You, he pointed at the protagonist, to my office. Statement required. Of course, the protagonist said pleasantly. The medical bay of Celestial Accord University was equipped to handle injuries from 200 different species. But the medics still looked baffled when they examined Krixtal and his friends. The injuries were precise, broken limbs that would heal cleanly, bruises that looked dramatic but caused no permanent damage. It was as if someone had calculated exactly how much force to use to incapacitate without killing, which was, of course, exactly what had happened. The protagonist had spent her entire life learning to calibrate her strength for a high-gravity world full of things that wanted to eat her. Holding back against students from gentle worlds was almost insultingly easy. The security chief's office was a testament to bureaucratic efficiency. Everything filed, everything documented, everything designed to cover the university's liability in any situation. He gestured for the protagonist to sit, which she did with that same economical movement that suggested stored energy waiting for release. Explain, he said. She explained, calmly, accurately, without embellishment. Described how Krixtal had initiated the confrontation, how she had attempted to decline multiple times, how the attack had escalated despite her warnings. You could have left the classroom, the security chief pointed out. I could have, the protagonist agreed. But I am tired of leaving. Every class, every social space, every interaction requires me to make myself smaller, quieter, less than what I am, because my existence makes others uncomfortable. I warned them. I gave them every opportunity to stop. They chose not to. This is the consequence of that choice. You injured 4 students. I defended myself against 4 attackers. If your species has laws against self-defense, I was not informed of them during orientation. The security chief stared at her for a long moment. The cameras malfunctioned. So, I hear. All of them, simultaneously, during the exact moment of the altercation. Technology is unreliable sometimes. The university will investigate. I welcome the investigation, the protagonist said. I imagine you will find that your equipment experienced random failures. These things happen. The investigation did indeed occur. Technical experts examined the recording systems, found nothing wrong with the hardware. The software logs showed normal operation except for those 8 critical seconds. No explanation, no evidence of tampering. Just a glitch that happened to occur at the exact moment that would protect a human from excessive scrutiny. Very convenient. Very suspicious. Absolutely unprovable. The university administration convened an emergency meeting. Representatives from a dozen species argued about appropriate responses. Should the human be expelled, censured, praised for self-defense? The debate raged for 3 hours before someone pointed out the obvious. Glitchedand had initiated the confrontation. Multiple witnesses confirmed the human had tried to decline. The injured students themselves admitted they had attacked first. By the strict letter of university regulations, the protagonist had done nothing wrong. By the spirit of those regulations, she had demonstrated why humans should perhaps come with warning labels. The compromise was this: no formal punishment for the protagonist, but mandatory counseling sessions on appropriate response calibration in multi-species environments. Glitchedand and his friends received academic probation and a permanent mark on their records. Professor Vornalth was required to attend a seminar on classroom management. Nobody was happy with this outcome, which meant it was probably fair. The aftermath rippled through the university's social networks. Glitchedand's live stream, despite its convenient glitches, had been seen by enough people that everyone knew something had happened. The fact that the specific details were missing only made the rumors more dramatic. Some said the human had destroyed the classroom. Others claimed she had put all 4 attackers in critical condition. A few insisted that the whole thing was fabricated for attention. The students who had actually been in the classroom knew the truth. They had seen the cold efficiency with which the protagonist had dismantled trained fighters. They had watched her return to her seat and resume note-taking as if breaking limbs was just another item on her schedule. They gave her a wide berth after that. The protagonist did not seem to mind. She continued attending classes, continued taking notes, continued being quiet and studious. But something had shifted. When she walked through corridors, students moved aside. When she entered rooms, conversations paused. Not out of fear exactly, but out of profound respect for what she represented. Humans were not civilized in the way the Accord defined civilization. They had not evolved past violence, had not domesticated their world into something gentle and manageable. They were products of a planet that had tried very hard to kill them and had failed repeatedly. They carried that history in their bones, in their reflexes, in their casual ability to calculate trajectories and forces that could break bodies. The galaxy had allowed humanity into the Accord because it was the enlightened thing to do. Now the galaxy was learning what humanity had known all along. Enlightenment was easy when you evolved on a world that did not actively want you dead. Earth had not granted its children that luxury. 3 weeks after the incident, Glitchedand approached the protagonist after class. His forelimb was still in a regeneration cast, and he moved with the careful gait of someone who had learned a very expensive lesson about assuming weakness. "I wanted to apologize," he said. His translator gave his words a tone of genuine contrition. "I was arrogant, ignorant. I treated you as a curiosity instead of a person." The protagonist looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, you did. I have been researching Earth more thoroughly. Not for gossip, but to understand. Your world is terrifying. It is home, she said simply. How do you live like that? Knowing that everything around you could kill you? The protagonist smiled. It was not a particularly comforting expression. The same way you live, knowing that everything around you will not kill you. You adapt to your normal. My normal just has more teeth. Krixtal processed this. The cameras. Did you? I am a student of xenobiology, the protagonist interrupted. I know that many species emit electromagnetic fields during stress responses. I know that recording equipment can be sensitive to such fields. I also know that sometimes coincidences happen. That is not an answer. No, the protagonist agreed. It is not. Krixtal nodded slowly. For what it is worth, I am sorry. Truly. Apology accepted, the protagonist said. For what it is worth, I am sorry I broke your arm. I am sorry you felt you had to. They parted on terms that might not have been friendship, but were at least understanding. Krixtal returned to his friends, who were all recovering nicely and contemplating the life choices that had led them to attack someone from a death world. The protagonist returned to her studies, to her quiet existence in the back row of classrooms. But word spread, not just through Celestial Accord University, but through the wider academic networks of the galaxy. A human exchange student had been attacked and had defended herself with such efficiency that the cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned to preserve everyone's dignity. Some species found this amusing. Others found it concerning. A few found it fascinating. Applications for human exchange students increased by 400% in the following semester. Universities across the Accord suddenly discovered a deep academic interest in studying Deathworld species. Not to mock them or expose them, but to learn from them. To understand what it meant to come from a world that demanded strength rather than granting it freely. The Celestial Accord had allowed humanity into their enlightened society as an act of charity, believing they were uplifting a primitive species. They were beginning to realize their mistake. Humans did not need uplifting. Humans needed patient teachers and clear boundaries, and the occasional reminder that not everyone healed from broken bones as quickly. In return, humans offered something the Accord had forgotten in their millennia of peaceful evolution. The knowledge that civilization was not the absence of violence, but the choice to restrain it. That strength meant nothing if not tempered with control. That the most dangerous individuals were not those who could not fight, but those who could fight and chose not to unless given no other option. The protagonist graduated 3 cycles later with honors in xenobiology. She returned to Earth, to a world that welcomed her back with hurricanes and earthquakes and predators that still occasionally needed to be reminded of their place in the food chain. She slipped back into that violent gravity like someone returning to a favorite chair, comfortable in the knowledge that she had survived the civilized galaxy and had taught it a few lessons in the process. Krixtal went on to become a researcher specializing in Deathworld species. His dissertation on human biomechanics won several awards. He never forgot the day he learned that quietness was not weakness, and that the scariest predators were the ones that gave you multiple chances to walk away. The cameras in Lecture Hall 17 were replaced with newer models, more resistant to electromagnetic interference. They never malfunctioned again, at least not when humans were involved. Some said the university had upgraded the equipment. Others whispered that someone had quietly arranged for the old recordings to disappear, that institutional memory was sometimes better served by selective amnesia. The truth, as is often the case, was probably somewhere in between. And somewhere in the archives of the university, in a file marked with the highest classification protocols, there existed a report on the incident. a report that concluded with a single recommendation that would influence Accord policy for generations. When interacting with humans, remember that they are from Earth. Remember what Earth is, and remember that sometimes the greatest mercy is allowing dignity to those who could, destroy it if they chose. We are fortunate they rarely choose. The galaxy had learned a lesson that day in Lecture Hall 17. Not about human strength, though that was impressive. Not about human speed, though that was notable. But about human restraint, about the deliberate choice to hold back even when provoked, to give warnings even when offense had been given, to break limbs instead of necks and tie tentacles into knots instead of ripping them off. They learned that civilized species evolved on gentle worlds with gentle pressures. Humans evolved on Earth, where civilization was not given but taken, not inherited but built, not maintained by passive cooperation but active choice. The Accord had invited humans to join their enlightened society, expecting to shape them into something less barbaric. Instead, they discovered that barbarism and civilization were not opposites, but partners, and that the species most capable of violence were often the ones most committed to avoiding it. They discovered, much to their surprise and occasional dismay, that humanity was not a primitive species being uplifted. They were a Deathworld species that had already uplifted themselves and were now graciously sharing the results. The cameras captured everything the university wanted them to capture. The glitches preserved everyone's dignity, and in the back row of classrooms across the Accord, human students continued to sit quietly, take notes, and occasionally remind the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room is the one that wants to be left alone. They asked for a story. They got exactly what they asked for. And if the ending lacks a neat moral or satisfying conclusion, well, that is life in a galaxy where thousands of species try to coexist despite having fundamentally different ideas about what civilized actually means. The protagonist would have appreciated that ambiguity. She understood, better than most, that the real world rarely wrapped things up neatly. It just kept spinning, gravity crushing everything equally, while those strong enough to resist it learned to extend that strength to those who needed it. And if you are planning to antagonize someone from a death world, perhaps make sure the cameras are working first. Or better yet, do not antagonize them at all. Some lessons only need to be taught once.